In the pre-dawn darkness of November 29th, 1944, somewhere off the coast of Japan, a lone American submarine commander stared through his periscope at something impossible. The vessel filling his viewfinder was enormous, so massive that Commander Joseph Enright couldn't find it in any recognition manual. He quickly sketched what he saw: a flight deck stretching nearly 900 feet, a distinctive rounded bow, a superstructure unlike anything American intelligence had ever catalogued. What Enright didn't know, what no one in the United States Navy knew, was that he was looking at a ship the Japanese had built in absolute secrecy. A ship so classified that workers faced death for merely speaking its name. A ship that in just a few hours would become the largest warship ever sent to the bottom by a submarine. That record still stands today, more than 80 years later. But before we get to that moment of history, we need to understand the man behind the periscope, a commander haunted by failure given one last chance to prove himself. And we need to understand the ship he would destroy, a floating fortress that should have been invincible. This is the story of USS Archerfish and the IJN Shinano. Joseph Francis Enright had the kind of background that seemed destined for success. Born in 1910 in North Dakota to an Irish-American father and Norwegian mother, he graduated from the Naval Academy in 1933 and quickly made his mark in the submarine service. By 1943, at 33 years old, he'd earned command of a brand-new fleet submarine, the USS Dace. Then came the night that nearly ended his career. In November 1943, Enright received what submarine commanders dream of: an ultra-intelligence message, top-secret decrypted Japanese communications, giving the exact position, course, and speed of the aircraft carrier Shokaku. This wasn't just any carrier. Shokaku had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor. She was one of Japan's most prized warships. Everything was in place for a textbook attack. The position was confirmed. The approach was clear. And Joseph Enright hesitated. He later admitted he was overly cautious. He ignored his instincts and made what he called a timid approach, abandoning the effort as daylight approached. The Shokaku sailed on, untouched. His 49-day patrol ended with 0 results. What Enright did next was almost unheard of in the Navy. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame equipment or circumstances. He wrote a request to his commanding officer. "I was responsible for an unproductive patrol and request to be relieved by an officer who can perform more satisfactorily." Admiral Charles Lockwood, commander of Pacific Submarine Forces, granted the request. Joseph Enright was removed from command and reassigned to a desk job at Midway Submarine Base, a career graveyard for officers who'd lost their nerve. For 6 months, while other submarines went to war, Enright pushed papers. Then his mother died in August 1944. Something shifted in Enright after the funeral. He felt he owed it to her memory to try again. He requested another chance at command, knowing the odds were slim. Failed submarine commanders rarely got second chances. And then came the poker game that changed everything. One evening at Midway, Enright found himself in a poker game with several senior officers, including Captain Pace, the man who controlled submarine assignments. The game went long into the night, hand after hand. Slowly, players dropped out until only 2 remained: Enright and Pace. It was 5-card stud, the final round. Pace had 2 jacks showing with a 3rd card face down. Enright had 2 tens showing with his whole card hidden. The dealer turned the final cards. Enright got another 2, giving him a full house. He pushed his chips to the center of the table and won the pot. Captain Pace stared at him across the felt. "Joe," he said, "would you run a submarine the way you play poker?" Enright met his eyes. "Yes, sir." Pace nodded slowly. "Okay, Joe, I like your spirit. You can have the next available submarine." 10 days later, on his 34th birthday, Commander Joseph Enright took command of USS Archerfish. He would have exactly 2 months to prove that the answer he gave at that poker table was more than words. While Enright was fighting for redemption half a world away, something extraordinary was taking shape in Japan. In May 1940, workers at Yokosuka Naval Arsenal had laid the keel for what was supposed to be the 3rd Yamato-class super battleship, hull number 110. The Yamato herself would become the largest battleship ever built, armed with 18-inch guns that could hurl 3,000-pound shells over 25 miles. Hull 110 was designed to be her equal. But the war intervened. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 seemed to validate Japanese naval aviation, not battleship construction. Then came the Doolittle raid, when American bombers struck Tokyo itself. And in June 1942, the Battle of Midway cost Japan 4 irreplaceable aircraft carriers in a single day. The Imperial Japanese Navy made a radical decision: convert Hull 110 from a battleship into an aircraft carrier. It would be called Shinano. The conversion was an engineering nightmare. The hull was already 45% complete, with armor plating and machinery installed. Workers couldn't simply remove the battleship architecture, they had to build around it. The result was a ship unlike anything else afloat, a carrier with the armor of a battleship, her flight deck protected by 3 inches of steel plate designed to resist 500-kilogram bombs. But what made Shinano truly remarkable was the secrecy surrounding her construction. A tall fence was erected on 3 sides of the graving dock. All workers were confined to the yard compound. And the penalty for speaking about the ship, even to family members, was death. The secrecy was so absolute that Shinano became the only major warship built in the 20th century that was never officially photographed during construction. American intelligence had no idea she existed. In July 1943, a captured Japanese aviator mentioned that a 3rd Yamato-class battleship was being converted to a carrier. The intelligence was filed away and apparently forgotten. When a B-29 flying at 32,000 feet photographed Yokosuka in November 1944, analysts couldn't identify the massive shape in the dock. Japan had built the largest aircraft carrier in the world, 72,000 tons, 872 feet long, and kept it completely hidden from the enemy. But secrecy came with a terrible cost. Captain Toshio Abe took command of Shinano on October 1, 1944. A survivor of Midway, Abe was described as humorless, undiplomatic, and highly competent. Exactly the kind of officer you'd want commanding Japan's largest warship. What he found horrified him. Shinano was far from complete. The watertight doors that would seal her compartments in case of flooding hadn't been properly installed. Many were simply not there at all. The compartments themselves hadn't been air-tested. No one knew if they would actually hold water out. Holes drilled through bulkheads for electrical cables and ventilation ducts remained unsealed. Fire mains and pumping systems lacked functional pumps. Most critically, the crew was inexperienced. More than 2,000 sailors and several hundred civilian workers were aboard, but most had never trained on Shinano's specific systems. Damage control crews had been hastily recruited from the bottom of the manpower barrel. Abe requested time to complete the fitting out. He was denied. B-29s had photographed Yokosuka. The Navy General Staff feared an imminent air attack. Orders came down. Shinano must sail for Kure, 300 miles south, where she could complete fitting out in greater safety. On November 28, 1944, just 10 days after commissioning, Captain Abe reluctantly ordered Shinano to sea. She was carrying 50 Oka rocket-propelled kamikaze bombs and 6 Shinyo suicide boats destined for the Philippines. Her escorts were 3 destroyers, Esokaze, Yukikaze, and Hamikaze, all just returned from the catastrophic Battle of Leyte Gulf, their crews exhausted, their sonar and radar equipment damaged. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the largest aircraft carrier in the world slipped her moorings and headed for Tokyo Bay. She would never see another sunrise. USS Archerfish had been at sea for nearly a month. Her 5th War Patrol had been assigned to lifeguard duty, rescuing downed American airmen during the new B-29 bombing raids on Japan. But on November 28th, word came that no air raids were scheduled. For one night, Archerfish was free to hunt. At 8:48 that evening, the radar operator called out a contact, bearing 028, range 24,700 yards, more than 12 miles away, just a small bump on the horizon. Enright climbed to the bridge and raised his binoculars. In the moonlight, he could see a single vessel with what appeared to be 1 escort. His first thought was Japanese oil tanker. Then the target grew larger, and larger still. By 9:40, Enright realized he was looking at something far more valuable. The vessel had a flight deck. It was an aircraft carrier, and not just any carrier. This ship was enormous, surrounded by not 1 but 4 escorts zigzagging in protective formation. Enright's heart hammered in his chest. Here was redemption sailing across his bow, but there was a problem. The carrier was making nearly 20 knots, almost as fast as Archerfish could travel on the surface, and far faster than her 8-knot submerged speed. If Enright dove now, the target would simply sail away. His only chance was to pursue on the surface, somehow getting ahead of the carrier to set up an attack. It was a desperate gamble. A submarine on the surface was visible, vulnerable, easy to destroy, and he would be chasing his target toward the Japanese home islands, into waters crawling with enemy aircraft and patrol vessels. Enright ordered flank speed. The chase was on. For the next 6 hours, Joseph Enright played the most dangerous game of his life. Archerfish raced through the darkness at her maximum surface speed of 19 knots, but the carrier kept pulling away, her zigzag course taking her first west, then southwest, always just beyond reach. Every time Enright thought he was closing the gap, the target would turn and the distance would open again. At 10:45, disaster nearly struck. Shinano's lookouts spotted the submarine. In the silver moonlight, Archerfish was clearly visible on the surface, a sitting duck for any destroyer that came after her. Destroyer Isokaze broke formation at full speed, racing toward the American submarine at 35 knots. 3 miles separated them. 2 minutes, maybe less, and Isokaze would be in gun range. Then Captain Abe made a fatal decision. He flashed his red truck light, the signal for Isokaze to return to formation. Abe believed Archerfish was a decoy. He was convinced he faced an American wolf pack, 7 or 8 submarines waiting to ambush him if his escorts scattered to chase shadows. Isokaze turned back when she was just 3 miles from Archerfish, close enough that her lookouts could see the submarine's silhouette. Enright watched the destroyer turn away and couldn't believe his luck. But the chase wasn't over. The carrier was still pulling ahead. By midnight, Shinano had turned due west, and Archerfish was falling hopelessly behind. Enright faced a critical choice: give up the pursuit or gamble everything on one desperate assumption. He chose to gamble. Instead of following the carrier's westward turn, Enright continued on the original southwestern course, betting that Shinano would eventually return to that heading to reach her destination at Kure. If he was wrong, he would lose the target forever. If he was right... For 2 hours, Archerfish ran blind on faith. At 11:22 that night, something unexpected happened aboard Shinano. One of her main shaft bearings began overheating dangerously. The chief machinery officer reported to Captain Abe that they had to reduce speed or risk catastrophic mechanical failure. Reluctantly, Abe ordered speed reduced from 20 knots to 18. He had just surrendered his only advantage over the submarine pursuing him. But Enright didn't know this yet. All he knew was that he'd been chasing for hours with nothing to show for it. At 2:41 in the morning, he sent a contact message to Admiral Lockwood at Pearl Harbor, reporting that the attack appeared impossible. And then at 2:56, he looked through his binoculars for what felt like the 100th time. The carrier was turning, not west, not away. Shinano was turning toward him. Enright's gamble had paid off. The carrier's zigzag pattern, designed to evade submarines, was bringing her directly into his path. All those course changes that had helped Shinano escape were now delivering her to destruction. "All hands to battle stations," Enright ordered at 3:04. "Torpedo!" Archerfish dove beneath the waves. At 60 feet, periscope depth, Enright positioned his submarine for the kill. Through the periscope, the carrier filled his vision. He sketched what he saw: that massive flight deck, the distinctive rounded bow, nothing like any ship in his recognition manual. One of his officers, Ensign Gordon Crosby, looked at the sketch and said, "The Japanese don't have anything like that." "The hell they don't," Enright replied. "I'm looking at it." At 3:15, one of Shinano's escorts passed directly over Archerfish, just 400 yards away. The submarine shook from the destroyer's prop wash, but the escort's sonar, damaged at Leyte Gulf, never detected them. Then Captain Abe made his final zigzag, a 30-degree turn to port. Instead of being too close for a proper torpedo spread, Shinano was now presenting her entire 800-foot broadside at the perfect angle. It was as if she were posing for destruction. Enright made one last decision, one that would prove crucial. He ordered his torpedoes set to a depth of just 10 feet. This was unusually shallow. Standard practice called for deeper settings to strike below the waterline. But Enright remembered advice from Rear Admiral Freeland-Dobbin: hits high on a carrier's hull would flood compartments near the waterline, making the ship top-heavy. With Shinano's massive armored flight deck, that meant she would capsize. At 3:17 in the morning, range 1,400 yards, Commander Joseph Enright gave the order. Fire 1. 6 Mark 14 torpedoes left the forward tubes at 8-second intervals, spreading from stern to bow to rip the carrier all along the starboard side. Running time, 47 seconds. Enright kept his eye pressed to the periscope. I saw a huge fireball erupt near the stern of the target, he later wrote. Then we heard the noise of the first hit, carried to us through the water. Got him, I yelled. 8 seconds later, a second explosion ripped the hull. Yahoo! Enright cried. 4 of 6 torpedoes found their mark. Captain Toshio Abe felt the impacts on Shinano's bridge. The deck shuddered beneath his feet. Through the window, he could see the ocean tilted at an angle. His ship was already listing. Enemy torpedoes, gentlemen, he announced with forced calm. Sound battle stations, all hands. Below decks, hell was breaking loose. The first torpedo had destroyed the empty fuel storage and refrigeration plant. The second wrecked the starboard outboard engine room. The third, the most devastating, opened the number 3 fire room to the sea, killing every man on watch. The fourth punched through the air compressor room. All 4 hits struck the poorly designed joint between Shinano's armored belt and her anti-torpedo bulge, a structural weakness shared with her sisters Yamato and Musashi. Executive Officer Captain Makami rushed below to assess the damage. What he found terrified him. Water was already knee-deep in some compartments. Air was rushing through gaps in the watertight doors, doors that had never been properly sealed. Bad as it can be, Captain, Makami reported. 4 hits and 3 of them struck in the Citadel. But Captain Abe was a survivor of Midway. He'd seen carriers take punishment and survive. American torpedoes, he believed, were inferior to Japanese designs. Shinano's armor would hold. He ordered the ship to maintain 18 knots. It was a fatal mistake. The speed forced more water through the torpedo wounds with every passing minute. Aboard Archerfish, Enright had already ordered the submarine to 400 feet, the maximum safe depth, to escape the inevitable depth charging. 14 charges fell over the next 20 minutes. None came close. The escorts with damaged sonar were firing blind. For 47 minutes, Archerfish's crew listened to loud breaking up noises from above. Enright believed the carrier was sinking. When he finally rose to periscope depth at 6:10 that morning, he scanned the horizon in every direction. Nothing. The sea was empty. Satisfied, Enright went to his bunk. He had no way of knowing that Shinano was still fighting for her life. Throughout the pre-dawn hours, Shinano's crew struggled against the rising water, but they were fighting a losing battle. The watertight compartments that should have contained the flooding had never been air-tested. Seals around cables and pipes were incomplete. Doors that should have held tight were leaking. As each compartment filled, water spilled into the next. Worse, the damage control crews didn't know how to operate the portable pumps that were available. Training had been minimal. Panic spread among the civilian workers and Korean laborers aboard. By 4:30, 1 hour after the attack, the list had reached 20 degrees. Speed dropped to 10 knots. By 6 o'clock, Shinano lost all power. Captain Abe ordered a course change toward Cape Ushio, hoping to beach the carrier before she went down. At 7:45, the starboard boiler room flooded completely. Abe ordered counter-flooding of the port boiler rooms to even the keel. For a few minutes, the ship righted herself. Then at 8:50, in a final desperate measure, Abe ordered destroyers Hamikaze and Azukaze to tow Shinano toward shore. It was impossible. The combined displacement of both destroyers was just 5,000 tons, 1/14 of Shinano's weight, now made heavier by flooding. The tow cables snapped under the strain. Shinano was dead in the water. By 10:18, the list reached 30 degrees. Captain Abe gave the order to abandon ship. The scene that followed was chaos. As the carrier heeled over, water poured into the main deck elevator opening, sucking hundreds of swimming sailors back into the ship like a massive drain. Large exhaust vents did the same. Captain Terauchi aboard destroyer Yukikaze gave a chilling order. Don't pick up any sailors who cry or call for help. Such faint hearts can do the Navy no good. Pick up only the strong ones who remain calm and courageous. As a result, many more men drowned than were rescued. At 10:57 in the morning, 7 hours after the torpedo attack, the largest aircraft carrier in the world rolled onto her side and slipped beneath the waves, stern first. Captain Toshio Abe went down with his ship. 1,435 men died with him. When USS Archerfish returned to Guam on December 15th, Commander Enright expected congratulations. Instead, he got skepticism. Commander John Corbus delivered the news, "I'm sorry, Joe, but Navy intelligence won't support your claim that you sank a carrier. They're saying there wasn't any carrier in Tokyo Bay, so how could you have sunk one? Will you settle for a cruiser?" Enright was stunned. He had seen the carrier through his periscope. He had sketched it. He had heard it breaking apart as he escaped. But naval intelligence was adamant. They had tracked every known Japanese carrier. None had been in that area. The ship Archerfish claimed to have sunk simply didn't exist in American records. Eventually, they credited Enright with sinking a 28,000-ton Hyo-class carrier based on his sketches, less than half the tonnage of his actual kill. It wasn't until after Japan's surrender, when American teams examined captured records, that the truth emerged. The ship Joseph Enright had chased for 6 hours and destroyed with 4 torpedoes was the Shinano, 72,000 tons, the largest aircraft carrier ever built until 1954, a secret weapon that the Japanese had spent 4 years constructing in total secrecy. The record was finally corrected. Enright received the Navy Cross, Archerfish received the Presidential Unit Citation, and both earned their place in history. 80 years have passed since that November night in 1944. In that time, submarines have grown larger, faster, and quieter. Torpedoes have become deadlier with sophisticated guidance systems and ranges that Joseph Enright couldn't have imagined. Nuclear attack submarines can operate for months without surfacing, stalking the seas in absolute silence. And yet the record still stands. No submarine has ever sunk a larger warship than Shinano. Why? The answer lies in the extraordinary circumstances that brought Archerfish and Shinano together that night. Modern aircraft carriers never sail alone. They travel at the center of carrier strike groups, defended by cruisers, destroyers, attack submarines, and aircraft that form overlapping protective rings extending hundreds of miles in every direction. Advanced sonar systems, both active and passive, can detect submarines at great distances. Maritime patrol aircraft drop sonobuoy fields that track underwater contacts. Satellites provide real-time surveillance. More importantly, modern carriers are never sent to sea incomplete. Shinano sailed with unsealed watertight doors, untested compartments, and an inexperienced crew. Her damage control failures were almost predetermined by her rushed departure. In modern exercises, submarines have occasionally achieved simulated kills against carriers. A Swedish Gotland-class submarine sank the USS Ronald Reagan in 2005. A French nuclear submarine sank the Theodore Roosevelt in 2005-2015. But these exercises occur under controlled conditions that differ dramatically from actual combat. No aircraft carrier has been sunk in combat by any means since the end of World War II. The conditions that created the Shinano's vulnerability, incomplete construction, damaged escorts, a captain who refused to let his destroyers attack, were unique to that moment in history. They're unlikely to ever align again. On September 2, 1945, USS Archerfish was one of 12 submarines honored to enter Tokyo Bay for the Japanese surrender ceremony aboard USS Missouri. Commander Joseph Enright watched from the deck as the war officially ended. Later, he visited Dry Dock No. 6 at Yokosuka Naval Shipyard, the massive graving dock where Shinano had been built in secret. He stood at the edge, looking down into the empty basin, and finally understood the scale of what he had destroyed. Joseph Enright went on to a distinguished career. He commanded submarine divisions and squadrons, earned promotion to captain, and served as chief of staff for the Atlantic Fleet's submarine force. In 1987, he co-authored Shinano, the Sinking of Japan's Secret Supership, praised by Tom Clancy as a brilliant snapshot of the war at sea and the men who fought it. In 2000, just months before his death at 89, Enright was visited by later Archerfish crew members at his retirement home in Virginia. They brought a submarine ball cap and pulled up the Archerfish website on a laptop. When the diving alarm klaxon sounded through the speakers, the old captain's eyes lit up. He made them play it again and again. Someone asked how he felt about sinking Shinano 56 years later. Joseph Enright's voice was strong and firm, unchanged by time. "Good," he said. "I felt good. We sunk the bastard." He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, the man who missed his chance and then seized another, the commander who bet on a poker game and won the biggest prize in submarine warfare history. The largest ship ever sunk by a submarine, a record that still stands. On the night of November 28th to 29th, 1944, a 1,526-ton submarine destroyed a 72,000-ton aircraft carrier, a ratio of 1 to 46. 4 torpedoes, set shallow on a commander's instinct, exploited a design flaw that would have protected any properly finished ship. An enemy captain's fear of a wolf pack that didn't exist saved the submarine that would destroy him. A rushed departure, an inexperienced crew, watertight doors that were never sealed, all of it converged in a single moment of history that has never been repeated. Shinano sailed for 17 hours. She never launched a single aircraft. She became the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine and a symbol of what happens when ambition outruns preparation. Joseph Enright came to that moment carrying the weight of failure, a man who had asked to be relieved of command after missing his chance at the carrier Shokaku. He left it as a legend. That's the thing about second chances. Sometimes they come in the form of a poker game, and sometimes in the darkness off the coast of Japan, they come in the shape of something you've never seen before. Something so secret the enemy didn't believe it existed, until you put it on the bottom of the ocean.